In Game of Thrones, Robert Baratheon rides north to see his friend Eddard Stark. After the death of Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, Robert needs someone else to be his hand and run the kingdom while he drinks and overindulges himself in its urges all the way to an early grave. Considering the two of them went to war together to overthrow a tyrant and rescue a sister, a woman that they both loved, Robert thinks Ned would be perfect for the job. After all, he's always been a bit more level-headed than his best buddy, and Robert himself even thinks that Ned should have been the one to take the Iron Throne instead of him. In canon, Ned accepts this deal from Robert, and it seems like this one decision causes a lot of problems for the Stark family. Ned gets caught up in some court politics and murder schemes, his family gets on bad terms with the Lannisters, he gets his leg speared after fighting Jaime, finds out his best friend's kids aren't really his, but incest babies. He tries to do something about it, only to end up getting betrayed and later executed. One of his daughters gets displaced as a result, and the other is imprisoned and regularly abused. His family rises in a rebellion that pretty much leads to their extinction, all because Ned went north and got involved with Robert's mess. But what if, in another world, Ned said no? Perhaps figuring that he actually had it pretty good in the north with his family away from King's Landing and court. How would the story change? As usual, when I do these what-ifs, I like to find reasonings that make my changes more plausible to the story and realistic for the characters to make. With Ned refusing Robert, I think it's actually pretty simple to figure this out, because in the book and show, Ned does actually have doubts about being Hand of the King, but feels like he's kind of obligated to accept. Part of it is because Robert is in a tough spot, and he's his best friend, and he wants to help him out. But another part is also because he's kind of pushed into it by the people around him. In the show, Catelyn tries to steer Ned away from going to King's Landing, and Maester Luwin is the one who tells Ned that he has to go and help the king after getting that letter from Lysa, since she basically incriminates the Lannisters for killing her husband Jon Arryn. But in the books, it's actually a bit different. Both Catelyn and Maester Luwin are the ones who push Ned to go be Hand, even though he doesn't really want to. So the notion of Ned wanting to stay home is not that far-fetched, and I think I have a few resolutions that make Ned staying in Winterfell his main mindset. First being trauma. Ned's father and brother once went south to see a king, and they never came back. His sister also died giving birth to Prince Rhaegar's child. Royalty basically destroyed his family at one point, so because of that, he's very apprehensive. Second reasoning is his disdain for the Lannisters. Ned does not like Tywin or Jaime because of what happened during the rebellion. The way Tywin had Elia Martell and her children killed haunted him for years. He also despised Jaime for stabbing his king in the back. He actually had a falling out with Robert because he pardoned them over that. So seeing how he's basically surrounded himself with the Lannisters also has an effect on what he decides to do later. Last reason is who's in Ned's ear telling him what to do. As I said earlier, in the books, both Catelyn and Maester Luwin convinced Ned to go to King's Landing. But in the show, which I'm primarily going off of here in this video, Catelyn tells him to stay while Luwin is the only one who tells them to go. In this timeline, we'll say that Luwin doesn't push Ned to leave and help out Robert. Here's how I see things playing out in this timeline. Things go about the same for a bit. Robert comes north and meets Ned. They go down to the crypts to see Lyanna and pay their respects before he asks Ned to be his Hand of the King. Ned says that he's not worthy of the honor, like he did originally, and pretty much accepts being his hand, and also to have Sansa marry Joffrey. Things take a turn though when they get Lysa's letter, and she pretty much says that the Lannisters killed her husband and are plotting against the crown. We get the same scene. Ned is confused and doesn't know what to do. Catelyn says he doesn't have to go, reminding him of what happened to his father and brother. Maester Luwin then says that instead of Ned having an obligation to serve the king, that he should just do what he feels is best. He doesn't outright tell him to defy a royal request, but still plants the seed that he doesn't have to do as Robert asks. So Ned feels a little less pressure to go and help out Robert. But what really sets him in staying, in addition to all this other stuff, is what happens to Bran. With all the other reasons I listed, the trauma, the disdain, the lack of encouragement that feeds into his doubtful mindset, the fall and near death of his son gives Ned some new priorities. Seeing his son like this really makes him reconsider what he wants to do. He thinks it's some kind of ill omen. Every time the Starks get involved with the Royals, something bad happens to them. The Royals come north, and then his son gets hurt. What else is going to happen next if he decides to go with Robert? So Ned talks to Robert afterwards and tells him that he's reconsidered and refuses to be Robert's hand, something that the king is not happy about. Even in light of the tragedy and Ned's misgivings about it all, he'll still try to convince him to come along with him to court. After all, Ned already said he would be Robert's hand, and he's the king. He gets what he wants. But Ned stands firm and says his place is with his family, and Robert will just have to find someone else. Now, while Robert will be upset, I do think he'll understand Ned's choice to stay, especially after his son almost died and still could die after falling from that tower and landing in a coma. So he begrudgingly accepts Ned's refusal, and his best friend stays in Winterfell, as he makes way for King's Landing, somewhat frustrated that he basically came all this way for nothing, though he still has that marriage pact between Sansa and Joffrey. I don't think this would change even if Ned refuses to be Robert's hand. Ned being named hand, I wouldn't say is a condition for the marriage pact, at least in this sequence of events. Maybe if Ned had refused to be hand when Robert initially asked in the crypts first, it would have deterred him from asking for a marriage pact. But the way I see things happening here is that Ned, while he refuses to go with Robert, still agrees to let the pact go on so they can make up for that old Stark Baratheon promise. But what I do see changing here is that Sansa does not go with the king and his family south. With how apprehensive Ned is about going south in this timeline, I doubt he'd be willing to send his oldest daughter to court alone, even if Robert is his best friend and she's engaged to his son. I don't really think that Robert would mind this much because it's not like she's getting married to Joffrey immediately. He'll think they'll still have plenty of time to get to know each other at some point in their lives, but Sansa will have to get used to court politics a bit later on when she's older. So already I think we have some pretty big changes. Since Ned and Sansa aren't going to court, this also means that Arya won't be going to court either. With the removal of the Starks from the King's party as they venture past the Trident, nothing of importance is going to happen here. Remember, in canon, Joffrey got into a fight with Arya after picking on her friend Micah, the butcher's boy, which led to him getting bitten by Nymeria running away, and Lady being killed to appease Cersei. But none of this happens here, since there aren't any Starks to antagonize and no direwolves. Joffrey never gets bitten, Nymeria is never sent away, and Lady gets to stay alive so she's not a pound of flesh anymore. Micah also gets to live since he never catches the prince's attention and gets accused of attacking him. So already, things seem relatively peaceful, as with the absence of the Stark family, the Lannisters don't really have a reason to put them on their radar when it comes to conflict. The only real layer of conflict that could come from the families at this point is what happens to Bran with the Cat's Paw assassin, but we'll get to that in a bit. For now though, with Ned refusing his best friend Robert, he needs a new hand to run the kingdoms for him if his best friend won't. Now, he has a few options, and one that is thrown around at the start is Jaime Lannister. Cersei says Jaime should be hand in the show, and Robert threatens to make Jaime hand after Ned gets injured.
Put on the badge, and if you ever take it off again, I swear to the mother I'll pin the damn thing on Jaime Lannister.
But I don't see him being picked even though he is thrown around. Jaime doesn't even want to be hand, and Robert throwing him out as a possibility never seemed like a serious choice he was actually considering. It was more so a joke and a way to get at Ned in the moment to make sure he never quit on Robert again. When I think of candidates though for who could be Robert's hand, I can think of about 3 people. First is Stannis, since he is a military man, very dutiful, and he is a proven leader of men, at least in times of war. Second is Robert's other brother, Renly. Renly is seen as a young Robert, at least in the books, and he's definitely more politically inclined than either of his brothers. He's charismatic and understanding, he has decent diplomacy skills. He could be a good hand if given the opportunity. After all, he got most of the Stormlands to fight for him during the War of Five Kings, as well as the Tyrells. So clearly there is something about this guy that makes people want to follow him. The final option, though, is Tywin. Tywin has been Hand of the King before and basically ran the kingdoms when Aerys Targaryen was king as well. He's also the father of Cersei, Robert's wife, and the man whose money he relies on the most. Tywin seems to me like the easiest choice to be hand. Experience aside, Robert will have people like Maester Pycelle, who is loyal to Tywin over everyone else, and probably his wife Cersei too in his ear telling him to choose Tywin as he looks through his options. With that being said, Tywin becomes hand, and the Lannisters pretty much have absolute authority over the crown, with the only opposition being Robert's brothers, as they either know about the bastardy or just think they're better fits for the throne entirely. Season 1 would be very different as a result of all of this. When it comes to the Starks, a lot of the events involving the Lannisters and the conflict that comes from that are just gone. As I said earlier, the only real thing that could lead to conflict between the families is the Cat's Paw assassin, the guy who was sent to kill Bran while he slept but was ultimately thwarted and killed. After the failed assassination attempt on Bran's life, the Starks will come to suspect the Lannisters' involvement like they did in canon. Catelyn is still going to go to the tower, find Cersei's hair, see the dagger was Valyrian steel, which you can't just get everywhere, and suspect that someone very wealthy ordered this hit. This would leave Ned and his family with a lot of questions, and they'll want to investigate, but I don't think that they know a proper way to go looking into this without ruffling some feathers. Since Ned isn't Hand of the King, he can't just lie low in court and look into this on his own time discreetly. The only real option he has at getting answers is riding south to confront Robert and insinuating that his wife's family has something to do with their son, which wouldn't be a good choice, marching into your enemy's home with accusations and no solid foundation for claims. It's a good way to put a target on your back and get yourself killed. So most likely the Starks are kinda stuck and can't really act on anything. They're forced to sit on their hands. I don't see them making any moves against the Lannisters, at least not yet when direct confrontation is the only real option. And on that note of confrontation, in this timeline, Catelyn will never confront and seize Tyrion to stand trial in the Vale for the attempted murder of her son Bran. Another side effect of Ned staying in the north. If Ned stays home, then she never travels north to tell him about Bran's attacker. She is never intercepted by Littlefinger on her way to her husband when she enters the city, and because of that he can't lie to her and tell her that the dagger belongs to Tyrion, so she won't feel bold enough to take him prisoner. And not to mention, she's not even traveling in this timeline. She won't come across him in that inn and try to take advantage of the situation and take him prisoner. And this eliminates more conflict for the family since Tywin won't raid the Riverlands in retaliation. Jaime will never attack Ned to get his brother back, which would even make sense in this timeline since Ned is too far away to get attacked to begin with. So the only time I see issues occurring is with the death of Robert Baratheon. And yes, I still think that's going to be a factor in this timeline, though it may happen a bit later than it did in canon. With less people trying to find out the truth about her children and her dad around pretty much securing power in the capital, Cersei may feel like she has no need to get rid of Robert just yet. In fact, in the book, she even says at one point that she hadn't planned on killing Robert as soon as she did. She wanted to get rid of Renly and Stannis first. Though I don't know how she even planned to do any of that, and I find it really funny because she tries so hard to seem like this master manipulator, but at the end of the day, her big plan to get rid of Robert was just to get him drunk and hope he gets taken out by some random animal.
I don't distrust you because you're a woman. I distrust you because you're not as smart as you think you are.
Regardless, when Robert dies, that's when all the stuff kicks off. Joffrey is named king, and like canon, Stannis and Renly, who are outside the reach of the Lannisters, make their own bids for the Iron Throne. This war would be very different from canon, as it wouldn't be a war of 5 kings. With Ned still alive and kicking, Robb never takes the helm. He's never named King of the North, and Ned never really struck me as someone who's very ambitious in his own right. I don't think he'd accept the position of King of the North if it was offered to him. In fact, he would feel inclined to support Joffrey as king. Remember, Ned hasn't been at court, so he doesn't know that Joffrey is actually a bastard. So to him, he's just the son of his best friend and therefore the rightful king. He feels he has an obligation to serve him. The same way he felt obligated to name Stannis king after finding out the truth about Cersei's children. Not to mention, who Joffrey is as a person wouldn't be much of a deterrent for Ned when it comes to supporting him, since he hasn't spent enough time with Joffrey to think he's unworthy of help like he did in canon. The only real thing I could see putting Ned off of supporting Joffrey in the war is the fact that his mother's family has something to do with his son almost dying twice. But even then, would he really put the sins of his relatives on Joffrey when he probably had nothing to do with it? He'll think back to the children of Elia and Rhaegar. They were innocents caught up in a war started by the actions of others and were butchered as a result. So the way I see it is Ned supports Joffrey at first, or at least is somewhat neutral in the conflict depending on his feelings about the Lannisters and their involvement in what happened to Bran. But what really determines Ned's placement in the conflict would be Stannis. Now in the show, Stannis finds out the kids are actually bastards from Ned, and since we're mainly going off the show, we could say that since Ned never finds out the truth because he never went to court, he never tells Stannis, and now Stannis doesn't know that the kids are bastards either, which could affect him sending out letters to inform people of the truth and even being in opposition to Joffrey if he assumes that he is the rightful king. However, if I'm being honest, I find that to be a ridiculous approach to this though, especially since in the book, Stannis already knew the truth about the kids without Ned saying anything. It was already working in secret with Jon Arryn. Since that makes the most sense to me, I'm gonna apply the book variation to the specific instance. Stannis already knows the truth about the kids and does not need any help from Ned, and like both the show and book, he sends out a letter across the realm to inform people of the truth. One of these letters ends up with Ned and the Starks, which shifts their allegiances in the war. While Joffrey hasn't left a particularly bad taste in their mouth since they don't know him being an incest baby would definitely give them a lot of answers to some of their questions. It adds a motive to Bran's 2 attempted murders. Maybe when he climbed that tower, he happened to see Cersei and Jaime getting it on. We know Catelyn already found one of Cersei's hairs up there in the tower that Bran fell from, and we already know that the Catspaw dagger, which is Valyrian steel, is very expensive. And with the Lannisters being the richest family in the kingdoms, it shouldn't be too hard for the Starks to connect the dots. This also provides a motive behind the murder of Jon Arryn. If Jon Arryn knew the truth, it would make sense that the Lannisters had him killed, even though all of that was Littlefinger and Lysa. The evidence would be pretty convincing, and it would make a lot of sense. There would just be too much behind it for the Starks, and for them to dismiss it as hearsay or propaganda. I could see Ned signing on after this to support Stannis as the rightful heir, since he's the oldest of Robert's brothers, and Joffrey is a bastard. This would be pretty big for Stannis, since with Ned on his team, he gets a much bigger army in the conflict. He gets the North on his side, and if he gets them, it's also likely that he gets the Riverlands as well to side with him, because of the Stark-Tully alliance. Speaking of alliances, I also think that with Ned around, this stops Theon from betraying the Starks. Theon already views Ned like a father figure, and with him not dead and continuing to be a constant guiding figure in his life, his presence may have some lasting effects on Theon that change his mindset. Also, if we want to simplify things here a bit, I don't think that Ned would let Theon go back to the Iron Islands to get help from his dad Balon either. While I'm sure he likes Theon, he doesn't see him the same way that Robb does. They didn't grow up together. He hasn't forgotten that Theon is a political hostage to keep his dad in check. Letting him go back to the Iron Islands would be very risky. Not to mention, if they're working with Stannis, he has ships of his own that they can use, so they don't really have a need for Balon and the Ironborn. And Balon will still be planning to join the war for himself, and that brings up a different issue. Theon is a political hostage, and his life is meant to keep Balon from acting out after his failed rebellion from years ago. But even in canon, before Theon was sent home, Balon was already making plans to fight back and attack the North. This essentially put his son's life at risk, and he didn't even seem to care. He doesn't really seem to even care that Theon is alive, to be honest, either. The issue is if Balon still makes his move, Theon's life pretty much becomes forfeit. So, would Ned kill Theon to get back at his dad? I think it would be an interesting issue because while Balon is acting out, Theon has technically done nothing wrong. And Ned is against killing people who are relatively innocent, like the Targaryen children, Rhaegar's family. Even though Rhaegar took his sister and the kids were political threats, he didn't think that they deserved to die. This also goes for Daenerys as well. Despite the threat that she could pose in the future, he was still against killing her because technically she had done nothing wrong besides existing. I believe this would be the same case for Theon should his father rebel. Even though he is a hostage, Theon is innocent. He hasn't done anything wrong, and up until now, he's actually been very loyal. So killing him may not be something that Ned wants to do. Not to mention, his death would probably be pointless as well. If Balon is willing to attack the North like this with his son's life still in potential danger, why would his death deter him from anything at this point? So I don't see Ned killing Theon. It's a move with no real merit. Another important change that comes from Theon staying on board is that the sack of Winterfell never happens in this timeline. Taking Winterfell was all Theon's idea when he was with the Ironborn, and if he never went home, this plan would never be executed. So Maester Luwin gets to live, Bran and Rickon are never displaced, Arya and Sansa will also be safe since they never left Winterfell, and if that's the case and the Starks are pretty much safe, Bran's journey to become the Three-Eyed Raven is heavily altered if he doesn't have a reason to go journey beyond in the North. The War of Five Kings will be very different in this timeline, especially with Ned helping out Stannis. Stannis pretty much had the smallest army in the war, but like I said earlier, with Ned on his side, this gets him the support of the North, and most likely the Riverlands as well. And assuming he still kills Renly with a Shadow Baby at some point as well, this also means he gets more support from the Stormlands. The Tyrells may still be a bit unpredictable though, since they don't really favor Stannis that much. Now, even with reinforcements, it'll take some time for the North to get south to Stannis. They'll still have to go through the twins and Walder Frey, who isn't going to let them pass for free. So most likely, Robb will get engaged to Rosalind Frey as a means to bribe Walder, and with Ned around, there is no way Robb is breaking his oath. Now in this timeline, I don't think that there's going to be a Battle of the Whispering Wood where Jaime gets captured by the North. The only reason Jaime was even out here in canon is because he was helping Tywin raid the Riverlands because Tyrion got captured. But since Tyrion was never held hostage by Cat and her sister, there was no raiding. There's no reason for Jaime to even be out here fighting at this point, so he's still in King's Landing as the Starks work their way up there. Now, the most important thing I think we need to talk about here is the Battle of the Blackwater, as that will happen in this timeline. How would things go in this instance? Stannis almost won this battle and took the city originally. It was only after Lannister and Tyrell forces showed up that he ended up losing. But this time, Stannis has a bigger army, people from the Stormlands, the Riverlands, the North, and the tactics that were used by the Lannisters in the original battle might not be employed here. What I mean by that is, with Tywin becoming Hand of the King much sooner and over Tyrion in this timeline, Tyrion is never put in that position of power. While he would be at court, he'd take a backseat to his father, and would be kept at a distance. His reduced importance in the capital could affect some of his decisions. like making Lancel into a spy for his sister, which he wouldn't even be able to do if he wanted to, since it's unlikely that he'll have a physical relationship with Cersei that Tyrion can exploit. The only reason that Lancel and Cersei relationship happened is because Jaime was captured by the Starks, but he's still in King's Landing, alive and well and uninjured. This is pretty important because if he can't exploit Lancel's relationship with Cersei, Tyrion doesn't find out about the wildfire that Cersei is manufacturing, and it can't be used to protect the city by burning Stannis' fleet. So that is going to be a problem for the Lannisters. This would be a very different conflict, and way bigger than it was before, now that Stannis has more men from the north, the Riverlands, and his fleet surviving. The Tyrells and Lannisters will still work together here, but ultimately, Stannis is going to bring out the win, in my opinion. And this pretty much spells the end for the Lannisters, at least the main line of them, since Tywin does have other relatives that are out there. Tywin would die, Jaime would die, Joffrey would likely be executed by Stannis, Cersei and Tommen would be dead because she would poison herself and her son before Stannis has the opportunity to capture them. However, Myrcella would still be alive because she would be down in Dorne when all of this goes down. So that may be something that Stannis checks in on later. So Stannis gets the throne and wins the war here. Though this could be an issue because he's now a follower of R'hllor, and that would not go over well with the Faith of the Seven. But that's an issue that can be sorted out for another time. In the immediate aftermath, I think that Stannis would offer a marriage pact with the Starks, main reason being because he needs heirs, and he and Shireen are the only two trueborn Baratheons left around at this point. Stannis has yet to sire a son of his own, so it's through this future marriage pact with a Stark and Shireen that he hopes to extend the Baratheon line. Now, these kids would be born as Starks because of Westerosi tradition and law, but Stannis can always just change their names or make the marriage matrilineal to avoid all that complicated stuff. That being said, who does Shireen get betrothed to? I think Rickon is pretty much the only viable option here, since Robb is already engaged and Bran can't use his legs. And I don't see the Starks turning that one down. And this would be a good way to make good on that old Stark-Baratheon marriage pact that never came true. Lyanna died before she could marry Robert, and Sansa was engaged to Joffrey, but he was a bastard and now he's dead. After that, the Starks would go back north, probably clean up all the Ironborn that are left over because their whole plan was absolutely stupid. And Daenerys would still be an issue, but much later on, as well as the threats of the White Walkers. But this is what I managed to think up today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me what changes you would have made down below, and I will see you all next time.